Alright, so let's go ahead and start implementing some views for our new schedule controller. So I'm going to right click on the index and I'm going to say add view. This view is going to I'm going to leave it as an empty view because we're going to have to kind of digest what is our view model going to look like, or are we just going to be pushing in a bunch of partial views, which we may end up doing since we have all these additional action methods in place. So all that means is we won't have a view model strongly bound, and we'll go ahead and just use the default layout and hit add. And that'll basically scaffold for us a blank web page. If we do an F5 here and run, we'll get a basic index page. So that'll be our starting point. So this page I want to divide up into probably about 2 or 3 sections. So I'm going to go ahead and use a table for that, set my borders to 0, and we'll use one row. And we'll go ahead and do this with, we'll do 2 columns. Now, if you are at all familiar with web design, you may be cringing right now looking at this. Yes, using tables for layouts is not the best convention. People do it. They do it for ease of use or ease of design. I'm doing it for speed. So, table will work just fine. We'll do a v-align top just to ensure that we get everything aligned where we want. And we will go to town on this design. Alright, so on one side of this, what I want to put is the actual course selector, or the list of courses. And then on the other side, I want to have a listing of courses in the student selector. So this is a course, so this is actually available courses. Maybe that's a better way to describe it. So we're going to have these two kind of pieces that are working in tandem on this page. So the first piece that I think what we're going to go ahead and do is, I think it might be best just to use actions, and we'll embed some actions in here in order to facilitate getting out what we want. So what we'll use here is we'll do @HTML dot, and then we're going to actually run an action here, or we can run a partial. And what this partial will do, no, I'm sorry, we will use an action because we're going to need to pass some data in and out. What we're going to do here is we're going to call a particular action from our scheduler controller. So the first action I want to call is get all courses. And what this is going to do is it's going to run that action, and then it's going to embed into our page the result, what's passed back from this view, which will be a partial view, from get all courses. And then the other one that I want to get is I'm going to add an action here, action result, and it's going to say get course selector. And what this is going to do is pass back all of the selected courses. So we'll say var selector equals schedule repo, get course selectors, and then we're going to get them from our student. So we're going to use these mechanics here again of actually grabbing the student. And what I think I may do is I'm going to wrap this up into, or I'm going to refactor it out into its own method. And I'm going to call it get student. Maybe it will be more specific, get active student. So now we can do one method called get active student, and that will fetch the student for us. We can also move this down to the bottom, and this refactor will take place in 2 spots. So we'll do it here, and we'll refactor here as well. So much nicer, one line of code now to get the student, and we've wrapped it inside of a function. So up here, if we need to get the active student, we can say var stu equals get active student. And we just call that method to get our student. We now have the student, and then we can pass the student here to the get course selectors, and then here we'll say return. And what we're going to return is a partial view, and that partial view will consist of the contents of our course selector results, which comes back as an IEnumerable of course selector item. So we've got 2 actions that we need to create partials for, and I'll also label this as a partial. So I'm going to right click here and say add view. Now before I fill out any of this, I'm going to copy the name, and then I'm going to check the box that says create partial view. And the reason I copied that is because it renames the partial to partial 1, and I'm going to rename it back to get all courses. And then the template that I'm going to use is for get all courses. I'm just going to go ahead and use a list for now, and then I'm going to bind that to course with no context and hit add. And what that does is it says, okay, we're going to be receiving IEnumerable of courses because this is a list. We do not need the create link, so I'll go ahead and delete that. And what this is going to do is basically generate a table of all of the course items. Now there's a lot of stuff in here that we may or may not need. We'll leave it for now, but we'll probably end up pulling out a fair bit of it before we're done. So we've created that partial, and then the get course selector, we're going to do the same thing. And this time it checked the box for us automatically because it saw that we were doing a partial view, but then it also renamed it partial, so we're going to have to rename this view to get course selector. And the template we'll use here again is a list, and we'll bind this to course selector item, and we'll leave our context empty. So we'll do that, and it'll generate another list model for us. And now because our model is slightly more complex, what we end up getting is no table headers or table data, so we'll have to kind of fill this in to help guide through what we're wanting. Now for myself, we don't really need a table. I think we can do this with a UL list. So what we'll do here is we'll say UL, and then each one of these items will become an LI. So we'll do an LI, and we'll say at HTML dot display 4, and then we'll say m item dot course dot name. Now you may look at this and go, why is it m at m where item dot? So m refers to the model, and the way that these helpers work is that they're always acting on the model that's bound to the view. And since we bound a collection of course selector items, it's expecting this to be bound to the collection of course selectors. What we actually want is we just need kind of a dummy placeholder here for that parameter, for that model to be passed in. And what we're going to do instead is that we're going to pass the item from the for each loop above. So we're kind of finagling or tricking it into thinking that we're using the model, but really we're not using the model. We're using the item from the for each loop that it's contained inside of. So that honestly confused me at first as well. It's very counterintuitive if you're not thinking through the mechanics of what's happening. So because of that, this is how you would display one item from a collection. If you wanted to display the entire collection, you would just use M, because that's the IEnumerable or collection of course selector items, but in this case we just want to show one item. Alright, so we now have these two in place, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to F6 to build, and I'm going to F5 to run again, and let's see what happens. And we end up with one exception, and it's referring to an ambiguous match. So we have two methods called getAllCourses, and it's not able to distinguish between which one we want. So what we can do here, and we may have to reconsider how we work this moving forward, but we can label this as child action only. And what that means is that it can only be called from within another view. It cannot be called independently. So we'll go ahead and run again. And we need to navigate to scheduler index. And that did not take care of the ambiguity. So what we'll do is we will accept this, stop build. We'll go back to the schedule controller, and I'm going to go ahead and just mark out line 45, or that method that exists on 45. So we remove the ambiguity, and then we'll work on the subject areas in a moment. So we'll F5 again. Refresh. So what is occurring is that we have not explicitly defined the foreign key property for subject. So with the entity framework, which we want to make sure that we do is when we try to define these foreign key, primary key navigation fields, is that we're not only defining the navigation field itself, but we also need to include the property, or include a property for the foreign key field. So what this is saying here is that the foreign key attribute on property subject on our course class is not valid, that the foreign key name subject ID was not found as a dependent type on course. So that name should become a separated list of foreign key property names. So what we have to do is actually define those properties explicitly within course. So to do that, let's go ahead and stop debugging. And then under subject, we can say public int subject underscore ID get set. And that would act as our mapper for the project, or I'm sorry, the subject ID. We will also need to do the same thing on the course selector item, because we have course IDs here. So we'll say public int course underscore ID and public int student underscore ID. So those will act as our mappings. So that should take care of things. So now if we run, and we have one more exception. So the teacher property off of our course, or off of course, doesn't even have it defined as needing a foreign key. So this will be teacher ID. And then we'll add another public int teacher underscore ID get set. And then we'll need to jump over to teacher and define alright. And now we should be able to compile and let's run. Alright, and we're getting one more exception here, and it is on get active student. We're actually not currently logged into this page, so we need to set things up so that we are logging into this page first, and we need to put some security parameters around that to make that happen. So we'll go ahead and stop, and we're going to jump up to the top of our controller, and I'm going to add just an attribute called authorize. And what authorize says is that you must be authenticated or logged in order to access this control. And then I'm going to point back to our login and our web config. So under authentication, under system.web, I'm going to add in here some child attributes. So under forms, we'll say that the login URL is /student/login. And then the default URL will be /student. Actually, it'll be /student/update profile. So when we run, we'll log in, password of password, and this will bring us back to our student list. So if we go scheduler/index, we have a breakpoint here to grab our student get course selectors. We'll clear that and hit continue. And we now see a list of all the available courses. This is the default list scaffolding from when we created our view, our partial view. And then our other partial is actually over here, but we don't have any courses, so nothing's showing up currently. So we've gotten data back, and we've actually injected this partial view into our index view through these two embedded actions. So get course selector currently is returning nothing. We can make a slight modification here to our get course selectors, and we can make this say, let's stop and say to list. Then we can say if selector.count is less than or equal to 0, we can return one type of content, and if it's not, we'll return a different type. So we'll say return content and say no courses selected. So that'll give us a visual. So we'll go ahead and run. And we'll refresh this, and we should get a little message over here on the right now that says no courses selected. And there it is. So now what we need to do is clean up this left side of the screen, get rid of the edit details and deletes, get rid of the checkbox for is active. We can probably remove the occupancies as well. Trim up this meeting time to just show the times. And then add a button here that says add to course selector. So to do that, let's go ahead and jump back into our get all courses partial view. Let's stop debugging. And we'll go ahead and drop these two columns. They are not needed. And we'll drop these two fields as well. Now the display for has some additional properties that we could evaluate, such as string templates, additional view data, field names, and just other pieces. But what I prefer to do is I'll use, since our meeting time is a date time, I'm going to say date time dot toString, and we can pass in a formatter, or we can say toShort time string, and that'll just give us a string of time. So that'll just help shorten up what we're seeing there in terms of the meeting time. And then the other piece is I want to get rid of these action links, and I want to create my own action link. And my action link, I'm going to call it add course. So looking at the overload for action link, the first piece of text is the link text, or what it says. The next piece of text that we're seeing here is the action that is to be called. And then the third piece is allowing us to pass route values. And those route values will be the ID, or primary key, as commented here, of the course that we want to add to the selector. So we'll say add course, and we're going to map this to add request. So that'll be the action to be called, and then inside of here we're going to say that the course ID equals, and this will be our item.id. So by doing that, we should be able to run again. Get all courses accessible. Oh, because we were in the focus of that. So the URL needs to go to scheduler/index. Because we cannot call that child action directly. So this is not like the use of the display for with the method call. So what we could do instead is we could simply say output item into that block. So the helpers are nice because they give you this level of control, but you can just output the values directly. So for sake of time, I'll just go ahead and make that modification. So now we have our English courses, our meeting times, and add course. Now clicking add course will call the action within our scheduler controller called add request. And this goes through and actually adds the request. And then down here I said maybe we need to not return anything, or we'll need to return a specialized view. I think what we're wanting to do here actually, let's go ahead and stop, is we're going to do a redirect, and we're going to redirect to a particular action. And the action we're going to redirect to is index. Now you may be saying, well, why that? Well, the index action is the action that gives us that full view. So we want to actually reload the page and reload back to the index so that we can see that change that has occurred. And we'll do the same down here when we do remove request. So if we refresh one more time, we'll refresh this page. And now if we click Add Course, we now get a bullet point for English 9. So we've now added English 9 to our selector. Obviously there's formatting work that needs to be done here, but we're now adding courses into our selector. These courses are also going into our database. So if we jump back to our database, Server Explorer, and we go into the Student Course Requests table, we'll see those 4 records are now being added. So by utilizing these partial views for Get Course Selector, Get All Courses, we can then begin to build out our scheduler for our application. So from here, and we'll do this next week as part of the wrap-up of this video, and moving into the next segment, is we'll add buttons to the right side of this that allows us to remove those courses from our course selector and bring that all together. Thanks.